Northanger Abbey, Jane Austen, Chapter 7. Half a minute conducted them through the pump yard to the archway opposite Union Passage, but here they were stopped. Everybody acquainted with Bath may remember the difficulties of crossing Cheap Street at this point. It is indeed a street of so impertinent a nature, so unfortunately connected with the great London and Oxford roads, and the principal inn of the city, that a day never passes in which parties of ladies, however important their business, whether in quest of pastry, millinery, or even of young men, are not detained on one side or other by carriages, horsemen, or carts. This evil had been felt and lamented at least 3 times a day by Isabella since her residence in Bath, and she was now fated to feel and lament it once more. For at the very moment of coming opposite to Union Passage, and within view of the 2 gentlemen who were proceeding through the crowds and threading the gutters of that interesting alley, they were prevented crossing by the approach of a gig driven along on bad pavement by a most knowing-looking coachman, with all the vehemence that could most fitly endanger the lives of himself, his companion, and his horsemen. "Oh, these odious gigs," said Isabella, looking up. "How I detest them!" But this detestation, though so just, was of short duration, for she looked again and exclaimed, "Delightful, Mr. Morland and my brother! Good heavens, it's James!" was uttered at the same moment by Catherine, and on catching the young man's eyes, the horse was immediately checked with a violence which almost threw him on his haunches, and the servant having now scrambled up, the gentleman jumped out, and the equipage was delivered to his care. Catherine, by whom this meeting was wholly unexpected, received her brother with the liveliest pleasure, and he, being of a very amiable disposition and sincerely attached to her, gave every proof on his side of equal satisfaction, which he could have leisure to do, while the bright eyes of Miss Thorpe were incessantly challenging his notice, and to her his devours was speedily paid, with a mixture of joy and embarrassment which might have informed Catherine had she been more expert in the development of other people's feelings, and less simply engrossed by her own, that her brother thought her friend quite as pretty as she could do herself. John Thorpe, who in the meantime had been giving orders about the horses, soon joined them, and from him she directly received the amends which were her due. For while he slightly and carelessly touched the hand of Isabella, on her he bestowed whole scrape and half of a short bow. He was a stout young man of middling height, who, with the plain face and ungraceful form, seemed fearful of being too handsome unless he wore the dress of a groom, and too much like a gentleman unless he were easy where he ought to be civil, and impudent where he might be allowed to be easy. He took out his watch. "How long do you think we have been running it from Tetbury, Miss Morland?" "I do not know the distance." Her brother told her it was 23 miles. 3 and 20, cried Thorpe. 5 and 20, if it is an inch, Morland remonstrated. Pleaded the authority of road books, innkeepers, and milestones, but his friend disregarded them all. He had a surer test of distance. "I know it must be 5 and 20, said he, "by the time we have go less than 10 miles an hour in harness. That makes it exactly 25. You have lost an hour, said Morland. It was only 10 o'clock when we came from Temple. 10 o'clock? It was 11 upon my soul. I counted every stroke. His brother of yours would persuade me out of my senses, Miss Morland. Do but look at my horse. Did you ever see an animal so for speed in your life? Such true blood. 3 hours and a half indeed, coming only 3 and 20 miles. Look at that creature and suppose it possible if you can. He does look very hot, to be sure. Hot? He had not turned a hair till we came to Walcott Church. But look at his forehand. Look at his loins. Only see how he moves. That horse cannot go less than 10 miles an hour. Tie his legs and he will get on. What do you think of my gig, Miss Morland? A neat one, is not it? Well hung, town built. I have not had it a month. It was built for a churchman, a friend of mine, a very good sort of fellow. He ran it a few weeks, till I believe it was inconvenient to have done with it. I happened just then to be looking out for some light, thinking of the kind, though I had pretty well determined on a curricle too, but I chanced to meet him on Magdalen Bridge as he was driving into Oxford last term. Ah, Thorpe, said he, do you happen to watch such a little thing as this? It is a capital one of a kind, but I'm cursed tired of it. Oh, said I am your man. What do you ask? And how much do you think he did, Miss Morland? I am sure I cannot guess at all. Curricle hung, you see, seat, trunk, sword case, splashing board, lamps, silver molding. All you see complete, the ironwork as good as new or better. He asked 50 guineas. I closed with him directly, threw down the money, and the carriage was mine. And I'm sure, said Catherine, I know so little of such things that I cannot judge whether it was cheap or dear. Neither one nor the other. I might have got it for less, I dare say, but I hate haggling, and poor Freeman wanted cash. That was very good-natured of you, said Catherine, quite pleased. Oh, Dit. When one has the means of doing a kind thing by a friend, I hate to be pitiful. An inquiry now took place into the intended movements of the young ladies, and on finding whether they were going, it was decided that the gentlemen should accompany them to Edgar's building and pay their respects to Mrs. Thorpe. James and Isabella led the way, and so well satisfied was the latter with her lot, so contentedly was she endeavouring to ensure a pleasant walk to him, who brought the double recommendation of being her brother's friend and her friend's brother. So pure and uncoquettish were her feelings, that though they overtook and passed the two offending young men in Milsom Street, she was so far from seeking to attract their notice that she looked back at them only 3 times. John Thorpe kept of course with Catherine, and after a few minutes' silence renewed the conversation about his gig. You will find, however, Miss Morland, it would be reckoned a cheap thing by some people, for I might have sold it for 10 guineas more the next day. Jackson of Oriel bid me 60 at once. Morland was with me at the time. Yes, said Morland, who overheard this, but you forgot that your horse was included. My horse, oh, did. I shall be Mrs. Radcliffe's. Her novels are amusing enough. They are worth reading, some fun and nature in them. Udolpho was written by Mrs. Radcliffe, said Catherine, with some hesitation, from the fear of mortifying him. No, sure. Was it? I remember, so it was. I was thinking of that other stupid book written by that woman they make such a fuss about. She who married a French immigrant. I suppose you mean Camilla. Yes, that's the book. Such unnatural stuff, an old man playing at a seesaw. I took up the first volume once and looked it over, but I soon found it would do. Indeed, I guessed what sort of stuff it must be before I saw it. As soon as I heard she had married an immigrant, I was sure I should never be able to get through it. I have never read it. You had no loss, I assure you. It is the horridest nonsense you can imagine. There is nothing in the world in it but an old man's playing at seesaw and learning Latin. Upon my soul, there is not. This critique, the justness of which was unfortunately lost on poor Catherine, brought them to the door of Mrs. Thorpe's lodgings, and the feelings of the discerning and unprejudiced reader of Camilla gave way to the feelings of the dutiful and affectionate son as they met Mrs. Thorpe, who had described them from above in the passage. "Ah, mother, how do you do?" said he, giving her a hearty shake of the hand. "Where did you get that whiz of a hat? Makes you look like an old witch." "Here is Morland, and I come to stay a few days with you, so you must look out for a couple of good beds somewhere near." And this address seemed to satisfy all the fondest wishes of the mother's heart, for she received him with the most delighted and exulting affection. On his two younger sisters, he then bestowed an equal portion of his fraternal tenderness, for he asked each of them how they did, and observed that they both looked very ugly. These manners did not please Catherine, but he was James's friend and Isabella's brother, and her judgment was further brought off by Isabella assuring her, when they withdrew to see the new hat, that John thought her the most charming girl in the world, and by John's engaging her before they parted to dance with him that evening. Had she been older or very near, such attacks might have done little. But where youth and diffidence are united, it requires uncommon steadiness of reason to resist the attraction of being called the most charming girl in the world, and of being so very early engaged as a partner. And the consequence was that when the two Morlands, after sitting an hour with the Thorpes, set off to walk together to Mr. Allen's, and James, as the door was closed on them, said, "Well, Catherine, how do you like my friend Thorpe?" Instead of answering, as she probably would have done, had there been no friendship and no flattery in the case, "I do not like him at all," she directly replied. "I like him very much. He seems very agreeable. He is a very good-natured, a fellow as ever lived. A little of a rattler, but that will recommend him to your sex, I believe. And how do you like the rest of the family?" "Very, very much indeed, Isabella particularly. I am very glad to hear you say so. She is such the kind of woman I could wish you to see attached to. She has much good sense, and is so thoroughly unaffected and amiable. I always wanted you to know her, and she seems very fond digression on James's part in praise of Miss Thorpe till they reached Pulteney Street, where he was welcomed with great kindness by Mr. and Mrs. Allen, invited by the former to dine with them, and summoned by the latter to guess the price and weigh the merits of a new muff and tippet. A pre-engagement in Edgar's buildings prevented his accepting the invitation of one friend and obliged him to hurry away as soon as he had satisfied the demands of the other. The time of the two parties uniting in the octagon room being correctly adjusted, Catherine was then left to the luxury of a raised, restless, and frightened imagination over the pages of Udolpho, lost from all worldly concerns of dressing and dinner, incapable of soothing Mrs. Allen's fears on the delay of an unexpected dressmaker, and having only 1 minute in 60 to bestow even on the reflection of her own felicity in being already engaged for the evening.